In the short term, we need to stabilize protracted refugee situations and crucially improve conditions for refugees who've been living in these situations. But in the long term, we have to remain focused on the goal of finding solutions. A core aspect of this is moving from what is called the care and maintenance approach, where we provide basic life-saving assistance in these emergency situations, to transition from that to an approach that's focused much more on finding solutions. And this was a key outcome of the meeting in Geneva. And then there's the question of the finding from our case studies tells us that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for protracted refugee situations. There are certain common principles that need to be taken into account in every situation, but we do need to find specific responses that are tailored to these individual refugee situations. Now, we have wrapped this up in what we call the 3 C's approach. 4 R's, 3 C's, what have you. But there are 3 C's to be kept in mind when talking about protracted refugee situations. First, responses should be comprehensive. We need to draw on all the available solutions for refugees, which includes repatriation, local integration, and resettlement, and other solutions which we may not have already conceived of. Second, they need to be cooperative, based on meaningful international solidarity and burden sharing. We need to engage a broad set of states and other actors to remain engaged in the task of finding solutions over time. And third, our solutions must be collaborative, involving a broad range of not only UN actors, but other actors as well. It's crucially the fact that humanitarian actors like UNHCR cannot find the solutions to these situations on their own. We have to reach out and engage other actors. Now, as Adnan said, this is a very important time to be talking about protracted refugee situations. The meeting in Geneva in December was very exciting, to the extent that there was an emerging consensus on the scope and the scale of this problem and the need for a response. The way forward isn't quite as clear, but there was some understanding that this isn't something that could be overlooked. There are also these key opportunities within the UN system. The Peacebuilding Commission, the UN delivering is one. These kinds of opportunities where refugee issues can be mainstreamed into the broader multilateral agenda. At the same time, there are domestic policymakers who become increasingly aware of the changing dynamics of the global refugee population and the need to take a new approach. And here I think Canada can be congratulated for adopting this interdepartmental working group model, working from a whole-of-government approach and eventually moving to a whole-of-Canada approach. If I have time, I'll say more on that in a minute. To understand the nature of the problem, we need to begin with a definition. UNHCR has proposed a definition where a protracted refugee situation is a refugee population of more than 25,000 who've been in existence for 5 years. There are a lot of problems with this definition. It excludes a lot of groups who have been in exile for a very long time. It's also the result of some fairly sketchy methodology. More generally, we can understand that protracted refugee situations are refugee situations that have moved beyond the emergency phase. The goal is no longer simply to provide this emergency assistance, and where the necessary focus is no longer exclusively on the provision of life-saving protection and assistance, but these are populations for whom solutions in the future do not exist. Our analysis has looked at the fact that major protracted refugee situations are to be found in most regions of the world, but are more closely associated with those regions of the world whose instability lies at the very heart of chronic regional insecurity. The bulk of refugees in these regions, of Afghans, Somalis, Sudanese, Burundians, Liberians, Burmese, to name a few, come from countries where conflict and persecution has persisted for many, many years. In this way, the rising significance of protracted refugee situations is very closely linked to the rising attention that's paid to dynamics of failed and fragile states. There is increasing recognition that among international security planners that we need to pay closer attention to these so-called fragile states. But we also need to understand how the refugee dynamic must be part of this analysis. There's a view in talking about conflict management and peace building that we can treat refugee populations as an issue of secondary importance, that we can wait until there's a peace process, that we can wait until there's peace building, and then refugees will come home. But in our research, we found a number of dynamics where the prolonged presence of refugees in a region, refugee populations in a region, can prolong conflict, can undermine peace-building efforts, and can act as a catalyst of insecurity. Not to say that refugees themselves are a threat. Refugees are victims of persecution and violence. But the prolonged presence of these populations poses very significant challenges to states in the region and organizations. Now, arguably the greatest consequence, arguably the greatest consequence of protracted refugee situations is for those individuals trapped in these situations. Let me just give a very quick anecdote because I'm running out of time. When we were on the Thai-Burma border about a year and a half ago, we met refugees who were born in refugee camps, who grew up in refugee camps, and were starting their own families in refugee camps. Refugees trapped in these situations are now, typically but not exclusively, contained in very remote, isolated, and insecure camps, where physical and sexual violence are tremendous problems. More generally, there are violations of their basic rights as outlined in the 1951 Convention. But our research has also found that unresolved refugee situations have these broader security concerns and are not just a humanitarian problem. The presence of armed elements in and around refugee camps, in refugee-populated areas, the impetus for intervention that comes from that, but also the rising tension between refugees and local populations. All of these are issues that need to be taken into account as part of a more comprehensive approach. But despite the need for this multifaceted approach to protracted refugee situations, the overall approach remains segmented, where approaches to development, security, and humanitarian action are in different silos. So one of the first challenges of working not only to stabilize and improve conditions for refugees in these conditions, one of the first challenges is to find more integrated and joined up responses. And this is why the UN Peacebuilding Commission and the One UN initiative is so exciting. But for solutions to be truly comprehensive and therefore effective, we must involve these broad communities. And so this is why Canada's establishment of the Interdepartmental Working Group is so exciting. Canada has also played a very important role in pushing the issue of protracted refugee situations on the international agenda, especially with UNHCR. By definition, these are forgotten situations. So if we can find ways to make sure that they are remembered more frequently, we've taken an important first step. Canada is poised to take an exciting and important leadership role in this area, but it really needs to be pushed and encouraged to do more. So there are two overall objectives that we need to make. The first is shifting from a solutions-oriented to from a care and maintenance to a more solutions-oriented approach, and then working towards these comprehensive solutions. We need to think in the short term and in the longer term. Let me just end by saying and reminding us that 2/3 of refugees in the world today are trapped in these protracted refugee situations. The average duration is now well over 18 years. These are situations that are not resolving themselves, and they represent a challenge that can no longer be overlooked. And so I think the discussions that we're having are a very important first step, but we're all called to take some form of action. I'll leave it at there. Thank you.